Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about what's going on currently in Israel and in Jerusalem and why they're at war yet again. It seems to be consistent that every few years that breaks out, and it's better for people to know why that's the case. So Israel, Jerusalem specifically, is a place of significance in all monotheistic religions, right? So you think that initially Judaism was centered around Israel, and from Judaism is where Christianity came from, the birth of Christ, and that thought process was where Christianity came from through the life of Christ and what was to be done after that. But at the same time, for Muslims and Islam, Israel is where Muhammad actually had a miracle happen to him that solidified him as a prophet, because he in Islam went to their version of heaven and spoke with the other prophets, right? So Israel, or Judaism, or Jerusalem rather, has a very significant bit of importance to them. Now, Israel is a state, Israel is a nation, came about after World War II. Obviously, in World War II, Hitler and his Nazi Germany, the socialists of Germany, decided they were going to wipe all of the Judaism practitioners, all Jews and all those that were born from Jewish families, off the face of the earth. During the time of World War II, what most people don't know is the Catholic Church actually thought that what Adolf Hitler was doing was supported by the church and that it was a Christian thought process in the beginning, missing the whole point of innocence, right? So he was decidedly a Catholic, and the Catholic Church thought he was a pretty important human being. Now, they since changed that, and they changed that during the process when they found out the atrocities that he was committing in the name of what he thought was correct, which was ultimately he was just a maniacal, evil human being. So when you think about that, currently right now Hamas is the group that is bombing Israel. Hamas is supported by the Taliban, right? The Taliban are from all over the Middle East and elsewhere in the world. They get financial support. So those folks are the ones that are supporting Hamas, and those are the people shooting the missiles into Israel. The state of Palestine was separated, and that's where the nation of Israel was built. So the United Nations approved the plan to partition Palestine into a Jewish and Arab state in 1947. The Arabs rejected that idea, and there's been subsequent wars back and forth for pretty much the last century, ever since that was done. Right? The initial war, when all of the Arab states attacked Israel to begin with, Israel pretty much held their ground and stomped everyone and won that war steadfastly. And in their minds, had solidified their right to be a state and a nation in that region. So there has been wars back and forth since, and it's about ground grabbing, etc. It comes down to that domination thought process. If you go out into the world as a country, you know, America has been called an empire or empirical state before, but we don't collect lands that we leave, which may be an issue. It may be a problem, right? If you look back at England, England was an empire, Rome was an empire. You had Xerxes and his empire. You had all these empires, and what that means is basically there were nations where the borders were expanding based on land that they took and land that they had dominance over. So let's get into what makes Israel so important. So for Judaism and for Christianity, it's pretty much the same school of thought, because the Old Testament is shared between the two. That where Judaism and Christianity separate is Christians believe that Christ was the Messiah, where Jews think Christ was a prophet and they're still waiting for their Messiah. Now, there was a period of time after the death and resurrection of Christ that the Judaism and Jewish church changed its tune after the resurrection, but that was shortly lived, because obviously if you can't have a church and have people giving their money to the church if you are not still waiting on what the church says they were waiting on. So Christianity was born in that way. So the city of David, the city of Jerusalem, the reason it's called the city of David, the promise and why it's important to Christians is because Jesus Christ himself came from the line of David that was born from Jews in Jerusalem, in that area of the world. So if you go back to Deuteronomy 14:2, God chose Israel, and that Israel was his treasured possession out of all the peoples who were on the face of the earth, because he knew that Christ was going to come in that bloodline. Their intentions And the Bible, the documentation of this, it shows their interactions with God. It reveals his character. It shows how God is merciful, righteous, reliable, consistent. He's got wrath, love, goodness, glory, power, etc. It shows all of this through Israel's relationship with God that is documented in the Old Testament. And it shows consistently how Israel and how the group of people failed him constantly. They worshiped idols pretty much overnight after miracles were given and food came to them from heaven and everything else. So they had a real tough time sticking to the plan. But that's why this land, especially after World War II, where they were hunted all over the earth and did not have a nation to call their own, they fled to Europe and they fled to America to try to get out of that Nazi grip that had conquered that piece of the world. So having a home where your beliefs are respected and supported matters. That's why America is a fantastic country to come to when it comes to religious freedom. Now, obviously, Congress is a pretty evil group in itself, right? I mean, these people at some point were supposed to be limited in their roles, but now they have endless terms. So what that does is, unfortunately, it does create a pattern of thinking that could be documented as a set pattern. But religious freedom still remains the same in the states. It's supposed to be separated from the state. So whether you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, or you worship some other series of gods or have some other series of religion, it does not matter in the United States because we have freedom of religion. Elsewhere in the world, that's not the case. Elsewhere in the world, you can be hung for believing something. Elsewhere in the world, Christians are hunted and persecuted and killed and murdered because they're Christian. Just understand that that's the world that we live in. Most people in Western societies, including America, are unaware of those facts and don't know how that works in the rest of the world. Most of society in America do not realize that people are bought and sold more now than at any point in history, and that are more slaves and more people sold into sex trades and things of that nature now more than at any point in history. So most people in Western civilizations are removed from that far enough and doesn't impact a large enough percentage that they don't know these facts to be what they are. But get back to the city of Israel, the state of Israel, and the country there as it is, and why it's going on now. They're thinking 1,400 people are dead at the moment through Israel. But just remember why the state's so important, okay? So from Jews and from Christians, from the Jewish faith and from Christianity, God came to earth in Jerusalem, in Israel, in that area, right? That's where Jesus walked. He walked all over that area. That's where he did his ministry. That's where he saved people. That's where his apostles were from. That's where he had his impact on Rome and the people that thought and led from Rome, all in that area. So obviously you can see that it is a pretty impressive and pretty important piece of territory on the earth when it comes to Christians and Jews. Now, when you go to Islam, the story from Islam, once again, I already mentioned that this is the monotheistic center of the world, right? Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all thought of there, and all other religions from monotheism pretty much came from that point. Prior to those thought processes, people had multiple gods. People had, worshipped the air, the earth, the moon, the air, and different gods within the seasonalities too. So there was different gods and beliefs. Still to this day, there still are. So the back and forth was specifically with Christians and Muslims over that area. You heard about all the conquests of the previous kings in England and in Europe that went out there for the Crusades, and that was the war to hold the control over Jerusalem between Christians and Muslims, and that went on for 1,500 years or better. So you have deep history there. For Muslims, the first Qibla was there, and that's why it was so important. That was the story where Muhammad was instructed to change the Qibla from Jerusalem to Mecca, and that's in the Quran. That's 2 verse 142 through 144. And it's reported to the Prophet Muhammad had said that there are 3 mosques to which Muslims should be embarking on journeys: the sacred mosque, which is in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, which is the mosque of Mine, which is in Medina in Saudi Arabia, and the mosque of Al-Aqsa, which is in Jerusalem. This Jerusalem is one of the 3 holiest places on earth for Muslims. So that gives you an idea that it's extremely important for Muslims outside of the 2 that are located in Saudi Arabia, at Mecca and Medina. The night journey that I mentioned earlier, and the ascension of Muhammad, that happened in Jerusalem. Muhammad was there, visited during the night, and his journey and ascension, called Isra and Miraja, happened in one evening. The legend tells that angel Gabriel came and took the prophet from the sacred mosque in Mecca to the furthest mosque, the one in Jerusalem, and he was taken up to the heavens to be shown the signs of God. And after the prophet met with previous prophets and led them in prayer, he was then taken back to Mecca. So all of this happened over a few hours. The whole experience lasted a few hours, and the event of Isra and Miraj is mentioned in the Quran. The first verse is chapter 17, entitled The Children of Israel. So that gives you an idea of why it's important to Muslims and Islam, the sacred faith for that farthest mosque, which is there in Jerusalem. And that comes from the Quran 17:1. So that's an idea of why it's such an important place. Then when you get back to just our human factors, you take religion out of it. The Palestinians feel like that was their state, and after World War II, frankly, the whole world could have taken a different shape because much of the land was dominated by different people. Much of the population was wiped out that previously lived in places. So that's why that has been tumultuous. In the Bible, it says that there will never be peace on earth in that area, right? So this is just staying consistent with that. Just because to have so many thought processes come out of that and have so many faiths believe that that is so important to what they hold dear, it's always going to be a tumultuous location. So it's awful to hear. Obviously, anytime innocent people are killed because of any motivations other than something that should be correct and holy. But that's the other thought process too, is who's right and wrong. At the end of the day, all of us, everybody is one soul. And the unfortunate piece of this is right now they think about 1,400 of those souls have been removed from this earth. So that's a little bit about Israel, a little bit about that area of the world and why it's constantly in this situation. You can look up several of what I mentioned before. I tried to give you the verses throughout those two. But just remember that when those works came together, the world wasn't as small as it is today. And meaning we're more mixed today than we have been at any time. The tribes are spread across all countries, right? And the people we deal with every day are much different than we are. We all share different religions. It's great about America. We mostly live in peace. There was a book that I was reading the other day, and it was a gentleman who was in a war zone out in Iraq when they were taking Mosul. And there was a gentleman who had learned English and asked him, he asked if you don't like Muslims in America, and the gentleman said, no, that's false. We like everybody in America. And that's the simple truth of it. So to get back down to the basis of the reason I wanted to make the video is people like other people, right? What governments do is not what people want. And governments, if you look at their approval rating of any government throughout the world, you're going to be hard to find one that scores much above 35%. Okay? In America, it's far, far worse. Currently our presidential situation is a joke. It has been for a while. And our foreign policy is atrocious. If we go into a war and people join us in those wars, we then abandon them. Look at what happened, after Vietnam, and look at what happened currently right now in Afghanistan, which was basically handed back to the Taliban after we left there, and it was an awful, awful situation. So tons of people in a bad spot because of that. But that'll give you an idea of around Jerusalem and what's in your headlines today. So I hope you liked the video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and we'll see where we go with this and if we post more videos around this content. I'm Ben. Be good.